and I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement here at PACE. This lecture, as well as all of our virtual programming, it's part of our broader initiative by the Alumni Office to bring meaningful engagement to alums in a time when we're in a lot of places unable to interact in person. I know for us, we are unable to travel like we usually do to bring you all programming and to just meet with alums. So we wanted to give you all a platform that you can keep connected to each other as well as to us. So just a few notes before we start. If you can just keep your devices on mute to drown out any background distractions while the lecture is going on. If you have any questions, you can either use the raised hand function or put it in the chat box. We'll be monitoring the box, so if you don't want to speak, it's fine. We can just read the questions out for you. But we do encourage you. We hope that these will be interactive, so I encourage you to, when you have a question and to turn on your video and to speak if you're comfortable with that. So now for the reason you joined us today. I'd like to introduce you to Professor Brian Evans. Professor Evans has taught at PACE since 2007. He holds a doctoral degree from Temple University in mathematics education. He researches mathematics learning with particular emphasis on non-cognitive affective variables, including self-efficacy, persistence, and mathematics anxiety. So he is published on mathematics history, mathematical problem solving, culturally responsive pedagogy, as well as cognitive reframing theory in mathematics. So a fun fact about Professor Evans, he is actually taking on 2 new positions in the fall. He's going to serve as the interim department chair in math, as well as the assistant dean for the Dyson College of Arts and Sciences and the School of Education. So with that, I will turn it over to Professor Evans.
Great, thanks Samantha. Hi everyone, good to see so many people here today. Thanks for the introduction, Samantha. So you know who I am. I've taught courses for a long time at PACE University in both the math and the education school. What I'm going to do today is actually something that came out of one of my classes some years ago. So let me give you a quick background and an overview of what this next hour will look like. In my class, I like to engage students and have them talk some more. So I want to try to turn this into a discussion, but I can start out maybe with about 10 minutes or so of some background information to kind of give us something to talk about. And the talk today is about the future and technology and how it may change the way we live, how it's changing the way we live now. So I'll give you some background around where this topic had come from for me, and then some background on the topic itself, and then have people talk or use the chat box. There is a hand raising feature since there's over 50 of us. When it comes time to talk, we can facilitate a certain order so everyone's not talking at once. If people raise their hands, we can call on people to give us some thoughts to the group. So where did this come from? I teach a course in math history. I see my fellow math professor, John Lamb, is here, also a math professor as well at PACE. And I teach a course in the history of mathematics. And one of the things that we talk about in my class is we talk about the scientific revolution and the great advancements in math and science that had occurred during the scientific revolution, and we talk about the causes of it. And one aspect that causes the scientific revolution is something that happened in 1440. It was the invention of Gutenberg's printing press. So the printing press now allowed mathematicians and scientists to benefit from the work of other mathematicians and scientists. So we see science advance rather rapidly. This starts with Copernicus, and it sort of comes to an end in terms of the scientific revolution with Isaac Newton. And so we think a lot, we talk a lot in class about the cause, and we talked about Gutenberg's printing press, the availability of knowledge, in other words, the dissemination of knowledge. And then the students, and I usually try to let them make the connection, but I'm sure you already did here, is that if the printing press allowed for knowledge dissemination to occur rather rapidly in the 15th century and the 16th century, today there's something else doing that. And that is the internet. We're using it right now. The internet, even though people can waste time or watch, consume media watch television shows, it also does disseminate knowledge very efficiently and very rapidly. Now, of course, the goal for our students is to be able to differentiate between good information and bad information. That was always a skill set we taught, but now more than ever, it's important because anybody can publish anything on the internet. And so we might talk about the source, but nonetheless, even with really solid, really well thought out academic sources, is available on the internet today, unlike in the past. So we have access to knowledge more so than we've ever had in history. And even better than that, you know, if we look back at the internet 20 years ago, well, it's faster today, more efficient today, but we also carry it around with us almost everywhere we go with a personal computer that almost everybody in at least Western societies in the United States has. Most people have a phone that accesses the internet with data. So that is rapidly changing our society. It's rapidly changing the way we work, live, play, communicate, socialize. So I like my students to kind of predict what could this do to society? What has it done to society, and what will it continue to do? So that's kind of the heart of this talk today, this discussion, and where it originated from. How it ended up here with the alumni event is back when we went virtual online in the spring and into late spring. A lot of our classes were taught this way through Zoom, and then we had talked about what Samantha mentioned about engaging with the PACE community. So one group we wanted to engage with were the incoming students. There's a term we use, it's called summer melt. It's the students who sign up for classes or intend to come, but then for one reason or another, they don't come. And so the research shows that when you engage with students over the summer, you connect them to the university, make them feel part of the PACE community, they tend to stay more. And so my colleagues and I developed this series over the summer that addressed important topics to students. And some of the topics included very timely things like racism, the BLM movement, with COVID-19, virology, economics, all the impacts, and mine was about technology. So this is one I've been giving to students for a long time, but one that we thought fit well with student engagement over the summer. So then Samantha approached me with some colleagues, and we figured, why don't we retool these and have some alumni events? Since we're not able, as Samantha said, to do live in-person events, let's see if we can do a Zoom event. So that's how this started. So it started in my classroom. It ended up being for incoming students, and then we realized this would work well with the alumni as well. They might be interested in these topics. And now that I see there's 59 of us, including Samantha and me, I see there is interest. So we're really pleased to see that. And so right now there's a lot of talk about technology and its impact because we're really almost only functioning with technology. I mean, this is the way from at least mid-March until now that we've been teaching at PACE in most universities through Zoom. It's the way many of you are working your jobs right now. If your jobs can be virtual, you're doing your work this way. You're engaging with distant family this way, friends, because you can't do it in person perhaps. And so technology is having a huge impact on us right now. But then it starts to beg the question of, will it continue to do so? Are we going to see these structural changes in society once we get a handle on the virus? And we may or we may not. There might be certain things that stay with us, certain things that don't. I have a suspicion about certain things that will stay with us technologically. But I've been giving this talk well before COVID-19 with my students, for quite some time now, at least a decade now in my classroom. And so what we've been talking about were even much broader than the impact of COVID-19 with the way we utilize technology. Some of the, well, let me share something with you. I'll start with where it comes from in my classroom. So I'm going to share a screen with you. This comes from a website I use in my math history class. It comes from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. And it's a very comprehensive website on the history of math. They also talk about Gutenberg and the printing press, scientific revolution. But the one question that kind of was the catalyst for this conversation in my class is basically these paragraphs. You don't have to read this all through right now. Basically what the authors are saying here is that we used to use log tables to do calculations, and eventually we moved up to calculators. And The two authors say we can think of faster calculators, smaller calculators, better calculators, but they're basically asking what's going to replace the handheld calculator that's qualitatively different than, say, a calculator itself. The way log tables and calculators are so different. And the authors don't reveal the answer, but this is an exercise I do with my students to see what will replace the handheld calculator someday. And I've been doing this for some time, so you can probably even make a guess. But this really generated a much broader conversation. We really move well beyond just calculators and what may replace calculators one day. Well, I'll give you a quick example of something that I talk about with my students now. At teaching mathematics, there is an app, and there's plenty more, and we're in the very infant stages of this. It's called PhotoMath. I'll put it in the chat in case anyone wants to download this on their computer. A really remarkable tool, and it's one of many out there. It's an app you can get in I have a Droid, and so I got it in the Google Play Store. You probably get it in the Apple Store too. It's free, and you take a picture of your math problem, and not only does it give you the answer, but it shows you how to solve it too. It's that, that well designed. And in a way, it's not that different than some of the apps now you can use, that if you are in another country and you take a picture of something in another language, it will Google Translate, it will immediately translate it into English for you. So it's kind of like that type of technology. And if you think about, we're only really at the very, very early stages of this sort of technology. It's going to have profound impacts on the way we live and function, just something as simple as this app. So I talk about that. I talk about maybe something like PhotoMath will, and before the authors of McTutor came up with this question, I don't think PhotoMath existed. So maybe they were thinking of something like PhotoMath, but we could even project further out. I often use a nice benchmark, 2050, to see what will the world look like in 2050 with the influence of technologies today. Now, before I say that, predicting the future is fraught with many difficulties. As we know, people have been predicting the future for a very long time, and almost always they're wrong. So I don't expect us to be right, but at least get a sense of the direction we're going. A couple of things that I talk about, and just some of the really substantive changes that we're seeing in society based on technology. Well, one of them is self-driving cars. We're at the very early stages of vehicles being able to drive themselves. I'm sure you've all read about self-driving vehicles, and there's concern. How safe are they? And once everything is figured out fully, it's going to be much safer than the way you and I drive. We get sleepy. We sometimes text. Hopefully no one does, but people do. Sometimes people drink and drive. People are, even if they're not, they're just slow to react. Something comes out in front of your vehicle, you slam the brakes on. There's a time delay between your sensing something's there and your foot and the brake pedal. A computer can be much more efficient at it. And so the idea, I say this to my students because they're roughly about 20 years old. And I ask them, I say, how many people drive? And, most of them raise their hand, I drive. And I say, how many do you think your children will drive? Or how many do you think your grandchildren will drive? And they kind of start to giggle at this point. And I say, I'm not kidding. I'm making a claim. Your grandchildren will never drive a vehicle. Maybe your children will never drive a car. They'll have self-driving cars. And if they do, it's going to be at an amusement park, and it's going to be like, come drive a 20th century car, and they're going to put a helmet on you and tell you to be safe and show you how to do it. And it might be something that you kind of replicate the 20th century or early 21st century. But that seems to be the direction we're going, and that's going to have profound changes. We already talk about how Uber, just an app, Uber and Lyft have profound changes on the taxi cab industry. I'm like Samantha, I'm here in the New York metropolitan area. I'm actually downtown in Lower Manhattan. I live a few blocks from the Pace campus in New York. And it's a big issue right now, taxi cabs and Uber and Lyft. But right now, Uber and Lyft have human beings driving the vehicles. We can easily conceive of a day where the vehicle's self-driving, and maybe the transition will be a safety driver, someone who's just kind of there in case. But then eventually that will be phased out. You might be, you take Uber, you use your app, and maybe you won't even be using one of these, a phone. Maybe you'll be using whatever the future phone is. We'll talk about that in a moment too, because we tend to think we've reached our pinnacle, and we haven't. And I say that because how many of you had a flip phone not too long ago, a decade ago or more, or even before, prior to the flip phone, the bulky phones? And so they're ever evolving too. So yeah, with taxi cabs, with Uber and Lyft, I mean, maybe it will be a self-driving vehicle. And so I talk with my students about future career trajectories, because I can't imagine a future, let's say 2050 again, where there are taxi drivers or truck drivers or really any drivers. So any driving-based career may have to adapt into something else. But it's not just driving-based careers. Plenty of other things are being automated, and AI is developing at a very rapid pace. So one of the takeaways that my students tend to conclude, I hope they concluded on their own, is preparing for the uncertain future means preparing with skill sets that might not be specific to a job that exists today, but one that's transferable to a career of the future. And so I'm referring to things like problem solving, communication skills, critical thinking, being able to adapt. Those are the skill sets that we want to prepare our students to be able to do. Even some things that are science fiction today, or have been science fiction, may be science fact. So some of my students say, okay, so no one's going to be driving, but I want to be, name your career. And even careers that today, are considered pretty automation proof, like for example, a surgeon, we can already create robotic surgeons. They're not ready yet to be utilized for safety reasons, but we're not far. We're not that far from the idea of a robot doing your open heart surgery. And, a surgeon could be really good, but robot will eventually be better, more precise, and safer. And so it's not really just the careers like driving a car, but careers like surgeons and other high-tech careers that require lots of years of training and preparation. So we talk about these things in class. We try to imagine what the future might look like, but we do start with the present, and we do talk about some things. And since you're an alumni group, I'm usually talking to this with 20-year-olds who may not even remember some of the things I'm about to reference for you. But you remember, the alumni, you remember when the record industry, music industry was huge. And today they're suffering because you can stream music now pretty easily, often for free, pretty easy to access online. And so the industry is not what it was. The newspaper industry is not what it was, the way we consume news today. I mean, I'll tell you, I'm 44 years old, but I have not at this point touched the physical newspaper in a very long time. I consume all of my news through the app versions or the website versions, just because it's more convenient for me to do it that way. And I can tell you, our young people, our current students, they don't pick up newspapers. They don't buy CDs. They don't do any of these things that you and I did when we were younger. And so it's really vastly changing the way we do things. Just even, for example, Encyclopedia Britannica. Many of you grew up with that. I did, and we used to have that on the bookshelf. My parents' bookshelf had Encyclopedia Britannica, and I used to sit and read it when I was a kid, when I was interested in a topic. But Britannica now, I mean, it's all virtual, and even that, you have things like Wikipedia. People tend to use the open versions like Wikipedia, and that's forever changing the way we consume knowledge, the way we do things. I don't even remember how I did things, like how I booked a flight a few decades ago. I just don't even remember. I guess it was the phone, maybe a travel agent. But everything we do, online banking, online travel, travel, booking your hotel, booking your flight, almost everything is now being done on your phones. But the phone, let's talk briefly about the phone, then I'll open up to discussion next. I want to share something else with you. I use this is from, I think it's from the Huffington Post, is I think the media source where I got this. You might be able to see, yeah, it's from Huffington Post. Radio Shack. This ad comes from, I think, 1990. You can look this up, 91. And look at all the things you bought in 1991. Almost everything here is now in one device, your end-all device, your phone. We have an alarm clock. I wake up with my phone alarm. Okay, had the calculator, that's in your phone. It's a phone. Well, we call it a phone, but it's almost a misnomer these days. It's really a computer. It's more powerful than this computer, which was $1,600 in 1991. Plays music, which doesn't require CDs. There's another phone and records. Even better, it can do this. For $800, you can put this thing on your shoulder, but your phone can do it now, and better. And the files are better. You don't need the tape. Speakers, yeah, you've got a speaker. It's not great, but you also have, and you have Bluetooth. You have the wireless. But yeah, all these things, and I didn't take the time to add up how much all this cost in 91, but we are doing all these items now on our phones. So I asked my students to think about what the phones will evolve to, because I also think it's a mistake to think this is the end. I'm holding a traditional modern, I think this model, it's a Droid phone. It's from Google Pixel, and it's from 2018, I think. But this has evolved. Touchscreen has evolved, and it's certainly much more powerful than my flip phone that I had about maybe 15 years ago, and before that, an even clunkier phone. So the idea that our phones are done evolving is probably a mistake. And so I asked students, what's the next generation of phones going to look like? What's the future? What's 2050 going to look like? It's hard to predict 30 years out, but what will the evolution of our personal computing device? Maybe that's what we should be calling it now, because that's really what it is. Your personal computer you carry everywhere with you. And so so that's basically the brief version of what we spend a lot of time deconstructing in class. And so I do want to make this more of a discussion. I don't want to talk at you. So I hope that this gave you some ideas to think about. And let's start with the phone. Let's talk about the question my students talk about, because I think it's interesting. What do you think the future of the phone is? And you can use the hand raise and then unmute yourself if you want to talk. What do you think? I mean, I think all of you remember the early iterations of cell phones, and you see how different it is. It's qualitatively different. It's not at all. I wouldn't call it a cell phone. It's not at all what it was 15, 20 years ago when you had your flip phones. So what do you think? And you can raise your hand and unmute. I'll monitor. What's the future of the phone?
How do we get in? Hello?
Hello.
Oh, over there. Okay. I just have a comment about something more than the phone. I think the phone is probably the beginning of it.
Yes.
But I personally have a cardiomobile device which measures my EKG. I also have a blood pressure monitor and a pulse oximeter. And what else do we have? And one of those laser thermometers, that you put on, you scan your head.
Yes.
Now, I was a big fan of Star Trek 100 years ago, and I can see the tricorder coming. And if you recall what the tricorder is, in effect, you scan your body and it goes to your doctor and it provides a solution, a diagnosis. And I can see that would be something that would eventually come into the telephone. I know I've read someplace that Apple is working on a device like my Fitbit, except that it not only measures my number of steps, but my blood pressure, the number of steps I take, my heart rate. I can see all of this into one device like that constantly monitors your health conditions and transmits it to your physician. That's what I see the future coming.
I think you're completely correct. And we looked at the Radio Shack ad and that our phones can do all those things for the most part. And I think it's the idea of consolidating technology into one device. Right now I'm on my laptop with you all, but I keep holding my phone up because it's not being used right now. But I could easily see a future where a single device, maybe a device, maybe it's not going to be a device. We'll have to talk about that. But I can easily see where we kind of go down to one device that's our end-all device for everything we do with technology. And that means maybe not having a laptop and separate devices. Maybe one thing, and maybe it won't even look like a phone. That's kind of where I'm going with this, is what will it look like? Just like you might laugh, there was a TV show in the 80s called Saved by the Bell, and a lot of people sometimes reference it when they talk about what cell phones look like on Saved by the Bell. The main character had a cell phone. It was this big giant brick. It almost looked like it needed its own backpack because it was so big. And people laugh. It's kind of a joke today. Sometimes it ends up as a meme. But in a way, our cell phones now could end up as almost like a joke one day. It could be, that's so ancient looking that you have this, this brick that you have to carry around, and you drop it, you break it, you crack the screen. That idea might almost seem like a joke to people in 2050. So I think you're right. I think our devices, I think every medical device you mentioned will be streamlined into a single personal computational device, computer device, that you can monitor all of those things with. And then it will also go to your doctor too. It will be automatically streaming to the medical professionals who might need to be, monitor, and it's going to be computer monitored. But when a person needs to be involved, a person will get involved. Speaking of, because I also did want to talk about some of the effects from COVID-19 and technological usage right now with Zoom. This summer, I had co-led an engagement program for college readiness with New York Presbyterian Hospital. One of our board members, who's also part of your group, and one of the alum on the board, is also a VP over at New York Presbyterian. So he has that PACE NYP connection. So we had a summer program for the students in order to get them ready for college, and we used Zoom as our main tool, and it was I thought it was very successful, and it's something that may last. It's something we may do in the future, continue using Zoom to engage hundreds of students. But let me get back to what our VP said. The VP was talking. He gave a speech to the students as well, and he was talking about the future of medicine. So this is where it connects to what you said about the monitoring. And he's saying COVID is really prompting doctors to think more about online care as opposed to having to come into a doctor's office, a lot telehealth as it's called today, where diagnoses and interactions with your doctor can happen virtually. So it can happen from home. You don't even have to go anywhere. You can, unless you need to actually be checked out by a human being. It's something where you can talk about your symptoms. Maybe, as just mentioned, maybe there'll be ways to monitor certain things like your heart rate, your blood pressure, and your doctor might just have it right there and say, oh, your blood pressure's high, you need to do this. And this could all be telehealth. But he did say that they're moving in the direction, and they're the biggest system in New York City. They're moving in the telehealth direction and less away from the in-person when possible. Education, we're doing that right now too at PACE and other universities. So this could be something that sticks with us. Maybe it's something that has some impact, but maybe not as much as we're experiencing right now. So yeah, I think that multi-device into one device is something. But what do you think the phones will look like in the future? What do you think the next step in the evolution of the phone is? What do you think will be a better phone, or could it be something qualitatively different?
Well, that's a hard one to answer. I see my Fitbit on my wrist, my charger, and the Apple Watch can do 10 times more than this thing can do. So it's obviously a wearable device. I also see clothing themselves. I remember reading some time ago about clothing that monitors different aspects of your body activity, including temperature and possibly blood pressure. So it may not look like a telephone at all, the way we conceive a telephone, but I do think that that combination of things is absolutely coming, and not very far into the future.
Yeah, we talk about with my students, in the math history class, we've talked about they've come up with some ideas about where they think the phone could be going next. Because again, we started with a phone, car phones in the 80s, or those clunky phones in the 80s. We evolved into a handheld mobile phone, literally a mobile that you can walk around with. And now we have our mini computers in our pockets. But will it be a separate device that we hold and carry? So the students they talked a little bit about what was called Google Glass. It didn't really catch on, but the idea that your glasses, or even maybe a contact lens, that you'll be able to see the internet right in front of you visually. And then they've talked about, and this is where they get really sci-fi, but I just want to emphasize, sometimes what sci-fi now is science in the future. We're just not ready for it yet. And so they immediately go to the idea of maybe you'll get a microchip in your brain and the internet will be flashed into your brain. And so you just have to think it. And maybe we'll be able to communicate that way. Maybe you'll think something and it will go to somebody else's head because they're wired. Some of the students said they feel a little uncomfortable with that, but I remind them that some of the things that they're comfortable with, their grandparents and their parents are not comfortable with. You know, they might not like. That's a technological advancement, and so they go, okay, maybe my 20-year-olds say, maybe when I'm 80, my grandchildren will be using this, and I'll say, in my day, we didn't do that. We didn't like doing that, and that's just the way it is. But then we get really out there. We think about the idea of, does it have to be hardware forever? And this is where you can't maybe conceive of it. You can't think of what it would be then if it's not hardware based, if it's somehow in your brain, but there's not like a chip. There's not a hardware component. What would that look like? And we don't know, but we're just speculating here because we don't have the technology yet to do something like this. I also remind them about how rapidly some things have changed, some things haven't, but I asked them if they recall the first flight in the world, the first actual flight, and they go, the Wright brothers, they remember that. And if they forget the year, they'll look it up on their phones in a couple of seconds. 1903 on the beach in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. And so the Wright brothers, they have their first flight. It's almost like a glider with an engine, but it's very basic, but it flies. And this is the remarkable part. Science fiction in the early 20th century during the Wright brothers' time had all these fantastic ideas about going to other planets in like spacecraft almost ideas. And the idea that the Wright brothers, 1903, that we'd get to the Apollo mission in 1969 of human beings going to the moon. That is remarkable. And that's absolutely remarkable. It was 66 years, a beach in Kitty Hawk to the moon. I mean, if you think about that rapid advancement, it's absolutely mind-boggling. And it relates to something in computer science called Moore's Law, about the number of transistors you can get on a circuit, and it doubles every 2 or 3 years. And this applies also to medical science, to a lot of knowledge. We're rapidly building knowledge. And if we're talking about technology here, the computing power is rapidly increasing. And so it ought not surprise us that these things happen so fast. They accelerate because of the way advancement has occurred. And so I asked my students to think about those brief 66 years from a beach to the moon. Now I want you to think back to your personalized computers again. And now they see it as, okay, 2050, maybe it is in our head. Maybe there's no hardware, no microchip. But that will profoundly change the way we function if the internet's that, becomes integrated with us. And I know this scares some people because the idea, of misuse or just scary it all together, being almost like connected to a machine. So, or if we can call it a machine, that closely. So it's scary, but it's maybe the direction we're going, since we have been rapidly advancing. I really think it's a mistake to think that we've leveled out, that the phones are, that 30, 40, 50 years from now, we'll have a better phone. I don't think we'll have a better phone. I think we'll have something so different from the phone in the way that the McTutor St. Andrews professors say log tables compared to calculators. They're qualitatively different. And I think that's what we're heading toward as well. I haven't been monitoring the chat, but I just saw Google Glasses became extremely unpopular. They didn't like being recorded. Okay, without permission, but we in a way, our society has kind of evolved into that anyway. You could be tracked anywhere with your handheld phones too. So it's we're kind of in the big brother society that Orson Welles talked about. So what do you think? I mean, these ideas are pretty out there, but that's usually how these things work when you look at science fiction and science. What do you think the future is going to be like? What is 2050? And again, I'm just choosing 2050 because it's a nice number. What will the next few decades, how will it change the way we live, interact? Do we think Zoom is here to stay. I mean, is this something that's getting us through COVID-19, or is this the way we're going to have education, the way we're going to have social interactions, jobs? I mean, a lot of companies are looking at Zoom as more of a permanent thing because it saves them on real estate. You don't need to have an office for everybody. People can work from home. And we're in a way, we're testing that right now. Companies are taking notes. They're looking to see, is this workable? Do people really work from home, or do they watch Netflix? You know, what do they really get things done? Can we monitor work from home to make sure people are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, or doing something else? And so yes, and I saw Zoom existed prior to COVID. That's right. And actually, this is interesting. I had taught a class. I needed to teach a class in Pleasantville, and I needed to also be in New York those same mornings. It was toward the end of a semester, and I was helping out. And so I was in a way a pilot of using Zoom to teach, because I told the students I'm not going to be able to be in Pleasantville for these days, so we still have to have class. We're going to do it through Zoom. So I actually was using Zoom a few years ago to teach part of one class. And I was impressed with how well it went. It went better than I had thought. I was kind of concerned, but it was fairly successful, I would say. But little did I know it was the trial run for right now. So yeah, so Zoom and video conferencing, Skype, Blue Jeans. I mean, those have all existed before COVID-19, but now they're heavily used, much more so than prior. But we're learning if it works or not. So will this replace the office? Does psychologically it replace your office? You know, do you feel disconnected? You know, are we able? And again, I want you to kind of not think about 2020 so much. Think about what Zoom might be. You know, are we going to be in little boxes like this forever, you know, on our screens? And we're probably going to laugh at Zoom 10 or 15, 20 years from now as antiquated and ridiculous looking. It's going to be something much more rewarding than Zoom. And so I want to know if you think, what do you think Zoom will be like? Or won't be Zoom probably, but how we're interacting right now, what would that look like in 10 or 20 years if we had to have a virtual interaction? What do you think?
Brian, this is Michelle from Alumni Relations.
Hi, Michelle.
Way back in the feed, someone had mentioned that they thought things would be holographic images, holographic displays, and that was just for the phones. So perhaps, I don't know if this still applies, if her comment still applies to this, but I want you to throw that in. There's some other comments in the feed about privacy issues.
Yes.
And there'll still be landlines. Luis Figueroa is saying copper-based landlines barely exist now. There's all kinds of issues with that kind of stuff too, that people are kind of having a side chat about, if you want to.
Yeah, so let me address those. So I mentioned sci-fi and I mentioned surgeons, and what I was thinking of, someone mentioned Star Trek. I'm a sci-fi fan, and I like Star Wars. And if you remember, the doctors in Star Wars tend to be droids, droid doctors and surgeons in the Star Wars films. But also in the Star Wars films, if you're familiar with it, in the prequels, the Jedi Council, when they're not available to be with each other, they're holograms. You know, people will sit in their chair still as a holographic image, as if the person's there. So that's their version. That's Star Wars Zoom, is you're present in the room virtually speaking. And I do think that's likely one way to do it. And it likely will be whatever our phone device is. Our phone device will probably be able to transport us virtually into, you know, almost like a room of people, perhaps. I mean, this, again, seems very sci-fi, seems out there, but it's not outside of the realm of possibility in the next decade or two. The other one was about landlines. Yeah, I mentioned my age. I'm 44, so I'm certainly not, you know, I'm not my students' age, which I know they're even more extreme than I am these days with these kind of things. But I don't have a landline. Cell phones are enough. I don't have regular cable. I have, you know, I stream. Everything's internet-based. So in a way, I feel even as a middle-aged person, I'm kind of, my apartment's kind of set up the way, you know, a 20-year-old's apartment is set up today, because 20-year-olds don't have landlines. 20-years don't even really talk on the phone. They use their phone for chatting. They don't really like to talk on the phone the way we do. You know, most people here, I'd say, are you know, of the age where, you know, we remember talking on the phone a lot when we were younger. And you know, that some of the shifts you're seeing with Gen Z today that we're seeing in our classrooms, the way they function, I mean, that's how that's the beginning of the future, because they are, they're the young people. So I wouldn't, yeah, so yeah, same with me, Doug, just class of 79. Yeah, it's at our age, we grew up with landlines, but it's not something young people care about, because they rely heavily on their phones. And my theory is that the phone is going to quickly evolve into something that's not even anything resembling a phone. And again, could that be something like Google Glasses, or something better than Google Glasses? Could it be contact lenses? Could it be microchips? Could it be something else that we just can't even think about at the moment? But I think it's fun to think about these things, that they're interesting thought exercises to think about what the future will bring. I can answer some other, I know people are chatting, so Michelle, what other questions that we've not talked about that came up in the chat that maybe will be some food for
One
thought?
that just came up was if we'll need people less for jobs, then what would be a hot job to learn now? Like what
That's
jobs to be prepared for?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot with my students, because I tell them that in their college preparation, they really should be preparing for an uncertain future. And young people today don't typically stay in their fields for 30, 40 years the way the old generation did. That's, let alone one company, but even the same field. And yeah, I think AI and automation is rapidly changing the job landscape and what the future jobs will be. I tell my students, again, back to the transferable skills: problem solving, critical thinking, communicating, being a good communicator, being a good collaborator. I tell them social emotional intelligence, which is their ability to relate with other people. That will always be a skill set that will go very far. So students need to be ready to be adaptable, because the careers that exist today, many of them may not exist in 2050 for our students. They may start in that career, but have to go to something else later on. I have a friend who's, he's an economist he came out of Columbia's PhD program. I had asked him, we talk about technology a lot and economics, and so that's where some of this comes from too. And I said, does that mean, and this was before it was a big campaign issue for Andrew Yang about UBI, that's universal basic income. Are we going to evolve into a society where we need universal basic income because all of our jobs become automated? His answer, and his wife's an economist, and they both agreed, his answer was, we've been predicting things like that for a very long time. And yeah, we don't have blacksmiths anymore. We don't have the milkman anymore. He goes, but we also didn't have coders back then. We didn't have all these high-tech jobs today that are needed, that they themselves might disappear, but something else usually replaces them. So he thought it was too premature to talk about automation replacing all jobs or most jobs. He said, but it's a big mistake to think that the jobs that are here today are the same jobs that the young people will be doing 20, 30 years from now. He said that economically is a big misunderstanding, but it doesn't mean every job will disappear and nothing will replace it. So it's just, it's a matter of being nimble and being adaptable. And that was his idea as well. I tend to agree with him. I think he's right about that. So someone mentioned about UBI, universal basic income. The very companies that create products using AI need consumers, right? So the computer might be able to create things, just in the same way that Henry Ford's assembly line, it required some workers, but it became more mechanized. And the idea today, if you look at a car manufacturing plant, a lot of it's mechanized, but you need somebody. Ford said, somebody has to buy my cars. And so that's true. That's true. In a society where 70% of the economy is driven by consumption, you need somebody consuming that. But then you ask the question, it begs the question of, what will the economic landscape look like 20, 30, 40 years from now? It may not look like what we have today. So the big takeaway is be prepared to adapt for young people. Older people, maybe you finish the career in the career you started and retire, and you'll watch it change, and you'll see that young people don't go into it in the same way that you might have when you graduated college. But they might be doing other things that you never thought about or never conceived of. I tell my students today, the job you're doing at 50 years old may not exist yet for many of you, and you don't know what it is, but you just got to be prepared for adapting to a new environment. Cybersecurity, yeah, I saw in the chat somebody mentioned cybersecurity is a big growing field that 100 years ago nobody even thought about, because we weren't even thinking about computers in that way. And so there's a new career. And will AI replace cybersecurity? Will you have an artificially intelligent robot monitoring and protecting, securing the network? Maybe, but not yet. Someone who works in cybersecurity, oh, I lost that comment, are really growing. Yeah, that's a growing field. And I know Pace's Seidenberg School, I know we probably have some graduates from the Seidenberg School. They've been really focused on cybersecurity. I've attended some of their lectures on it and their programming about cybersecurity, since we know that's going to be an important job set for the 20-year-olds today. That's going to be a career path for many of them. I don't want to do too much of the talking. We have about 10 more minutes. Thoughts, comments, questions? Has this spurred any ideas that you thought you might want to share with the group?
Professor Evans?
Yes. Hi.
How are you, sir?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. So at the very beginning of your comments, a number of different thoughts started to run through my feeble mind. If you have a moment or two, I'd like to share them.
Please do.
I think by now most of us have seen the movie The Matrix. Remember where Neo was sitting in the chair and he had that plug in the back of his head?
Mm-hmm.
He woke up and he said, "I know Kung Fu." I think that's the way the world is going to end up being in some point in the future, which then begs the question, what does education look like? Several years back, I caught an article in Scientific American that made the two-sided argument that the reliance on technology is softening the human brain, as in math students that need to multiply 7 times 7 on a calculator or their phone, but then conversely, maybe taking that element away from the thought process and forcing people to think more about the big picture problem solving is the better way to go. I'm not necessarily sure. Curious your thoughts on that. I spent three semesters. I taught mathematics for 3 semesters as an interim job, as an aside. It was the most rewarding work I ever did. And if I were able to convert that into a full-time job, I'd still be doing it. I loved it. But so that's always been a question for me. Where's the trade-off? In my current role as a technical sales representative for an industrial chemical distributor, I still have loads of people who prefer talking than typing. Some of them are even younger than me, which is shocking. But I think the nature of that particular industry and the problems manufacturing folks face in developing new formulations requires them to do more than just press a few buttons on a computer. But the whole thing is still a mystery to me. Final thought, the remote operating concept is now totally proven. Commercial real estate will be for sale in a big way in the future. Several months ago, my employer asked me, "Hey, what do you want to do at the office?" I told him, "Close it, save yourself some money, pay me more. I'm happy operating out of a home office." A little frustrating that I feel handcuffed to a hot radiator since March, and I'm hoping there comes a day when Governor Cuomo gives me the key to that handcuff. But till then, I think remote operation is no longer the wave of the future. It is here. Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for those really well thought out comments. So education, that is within my background, and I talk quite a bit about the way education. So I do research in education, and what the research is saying now about current education is students do perform better when you address these skill sets we're talking about, like critical thinking and problem solving. So I do this in a math context as well, like you do. And instead of measuring their rote learning and their memorization, did they memorize the formula? Did they plug the numbers in? We want to look at, are they able to take a real world problem and figure out, what information do I have? What's the question? And how do I go about solving this? And, in an authentic manner, that they don't immediately have the method or the formula in front of them, and they're able to truly problem solve. I think with what you talked about with the Matrix, and now I know Kung Fu, being hooked up to the machine, I think that that's gonna make this even more true in the future. For example, I gave earlier an example about the Wright brothers and how if I ask my students, you know, when did the Wright brothers fly their plane, many of them don't know, so they'll look it up. And I know some people, you know, of a certain age, my age and around my age or older, younger even, will say, oh, that I lament that, you know, that I memorized all these important dates and facts in school. But the young people today, they're so savvy with their devices, they find these things so fast, but it leaves us an opportunity to spend less time on the rote, things that can be easily found, that when you and I were in school, were not easily found. You know, if we didn't know the Wright brothers, we had to go find an encyclopedia set somewhere, and maybe we didn't have access to one. So what it does is it opens up the curriculum to talk about better things than rote learning, dates and facts and figures. Instead, it allows teachers to focus and professors to focus more on the actual problem solving. So I think with the ubiquity of technology that helps us find these facts, and whether it's your phone today or something else, you know, something even better, it's not, at least in the short run, going to replace those critical problem solving skills that will probably be the main focus of education, at least in the next few decades. Now, if Neo from the Matrix, if that's the way we're getting not just facts, but we're getting all that kind of education in someone's head, then yeah, maybe schools are no longer needed at that point. I think we're far enough away from that to say anyone alive today, you know, will have a reason for school. But yeah, that's too far out. But yeah, in the short term, as your phone and other devices give you vast amounts of access to information, no doubt it will change the way we learn and teach in the schools, in both college and K through 12. This is a nice question to kind of get near the end, because I started with 1440, the Gutenberg printing press and knowledge dissemination. Prior to the printing press, most scientists and mathematicians, and there weren't too many of them because you had to have enough money to have your own private library, and they were handwritten books. You know, there wasn't, you know, an actual, wasn't cheap print that later would be available, that more people have access to more information and can build upon that information, hence the scientific revolution. So I tell my students, I think we're in another golden age of a scientific revolution. It might not always feel that way, but I think we're at the early stages of how the internet and technology radically changes of how we acquire knowledge and use knowledge in a way that will accelerate progress at a much more rapid pace than we've maybe experienced within our lifetimes thus far. So I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that technology will have some disruptions. We talk about disruptive technology, but overall, I think technology will continue to enhance our lives in a positive manner, the way that access to information for our young people today and us, how that improves their lives as well and their education. We've got about 3 more minutes before the end. Any concluding thoughts that anybody wanted to share? Any final?
Yeah, but Brian, this is John Lamb. I wanted to bring in some old-fashioned things that, and since Pace wants to have the app on my iPhone, I don't have an iPhone. I still have my BlackBerry, which is very and it's probably 9-10 years old, but I worked my whole career at IBM, and of course it was all in technology. And everybody had a BlackBerry at that time. That's why I wanted to.
I remember.
But the real problem, and we're all starting classes, hybrid or high flex, is on next Monday, and I had the experience last spring. It's not as good for the students. There's no doubt about that. I mean, we hear about it all the time, and we all remember our relationships, you know, graduate school or undergraduate, making friends with other people. You don't make friends like that if you've just had remote learning and you know, and continue on that. So it's very interesting, and this is a good topic because COVID has changed things so much.
Thank you for that, John. And that seems like a good concluding remark. So I'll respond to what you said. I think a lot also about the psychological impact of connecting in a virtual environment, at least the way it is now. Maybe we'll have like the Star Wars version someday where we actually feel like we're in a room with people and it really replicates a social environment. But John, and being that this is an alumni group, most of you are still engaged with PACE, I think, because you have good memories of PACE. You have good memories of working with other students at PACE or professors at PACE or both, other people. And it's education is a people-based thing. And when we're learning everything on Zoom, there are some limitations to that. So I agree with you, John. I think that unless technology can find a way to be psychologically satisfying the way in-person interactions are, I can't see technology replacing the human interaction we have in a physical classroom anytime soon, just because these Zoom boxes are too limiting. And we can connect better in Zoom boxes than we can through writing an old-fashioned letter or being on a telephone, but it still doesn't replicate the human-to-human interactions that many students report as one of the most rewarding aspects of their college academic careers. And so I agree, at least in the next few decades, I don't see education becoming completely remote or completely online. I think we're in an interesting time that we have to do this to an extent, but I think once the virus is under control and when we come out on the other side of this, I think there will be some changes, but I don't see, this is not going to be the new normal. I don't think Zoom is going to be the new normal for our classrooms. It might enhance our classrooms, but it won't replace our classrooms.
Yep, good.
May I ask a question, please?
Yes.
Good afternoon. This is Doreen Patterson.
Hi, Doreen.
Hi. I too agree that the technology is not going anywhere. It is here to stay. It's just getting better and better. But as it gets better and better, our student also becomes savvier and savvier with the technology. However, one thing that is observed is that their ethical skills are not matching up with their technical skills, because we find that when they go for a job, they're not able to keep their high-handed jobs. Why? They have no respect for boss or for the rules or anything. And so we find that they're smart, but they can't keep a job. They keep switching jobs. How do we build ethics into our curriculum so that when they go out there, they're not only ready technologically, but ethically as well?
That's a great question. So I hear two things in that. I hear how to prepare students, ethically speaking for careers, and how the social interactions they have with, like you said, a boss or coworkers. It reminds me a little bit of what had the conversation that came up the last time we had a big economic crisis in 2008. And some of it was around business ethics, and a lot of business schools around the country, and I know we have a lot of Leuven graduates here, business school grads, we're realizing that integrating business ethics into the curriculum was an essential piece to this after the crisis in 2008. But what I'm thinking when you said that was, I mentioned earlier problem-solving, critical thinking, and those transferable skills, but social emotional intelligence. There's a book I recommend my students. It's an old book. It's almost 100 years old. Many of you probably know it though. In 1936, Dale Carnegie published How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's 100 years old almost, but it's still a remarkable read in preparing young people to interact with others in a professional environment. In other words, how do I work with people? And I think that book has some timeless ideas in there. So I do recommend that book to my students, even though it's a bit dated. And a little unrelated, the Carnegie Institute, not related directly to the book, but had published this interesting statistic about 80% of our success is in, it said in our ability to lead, to negotiate, to be personable. So in other words, social emotional intelligence. It was 85%, sorry, and 15% are technical skills. I found that remarkable, but I also found that it coincided with my own experiences. We've all known people in the workplace who are highly technically skilled, but they're not able to work on a team. They're not able to work with others. And they don't tend to get promoted. They don't tend to be the people that end up being the boss one day. The people that end up being the boss oftentimes are the people who were able to lead and motivate people and work with others, in addition to having, you know, at least some level of technical skills. And so I share this thought also with my students, and say, you know, if you work well with others, you will go far. If you
Absolutely.
don't, you need to work on it.
Absolutely.
But thank you for that comment. Well, we are out of time. It's 1:04, so I know we went a little over. So I do want to thank everyone. We had a very large group today. I hope we continue these. I think they're interesting, and maybe, just maybe, one day when we're on the other side of this, we can do this on the campus. But this was at least convenient. You didn't have to leave your home or wherever you are to engage here. But maybe we'll have a hybrid version. Maybe some of you will be on Zoom, and some of you will be in one of the PACE classrooms where we can have a, you know, robust in-person conversation. So we'll hopefully get to that. So thank you again, everybody. Really appreciate your time today and the engaging conversation. I learned a lot from you all as well, and I really appreciate your time and being here today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank
It
you.
was worth
Bye.
my time as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for me too. Thanks,
Everybody, if you
everyone.
go to the alumni website and go to Setters Gone Virtual, you can see more events that we have upcoming. There's more faculty lectures. There's a finance seminar next week on maximizing for your retirement and things like that. So please keep joining us. We're happy to be able to be a part of your day and your life with all this crazy stuff going on.